In this video, I'll show you how to make a no-filter Nano Paludarium that's perfect for beginners. I'll take you through the entire build process whilst giving you lots of tips along the way, and I'll even show you how it looks after 6 weeks of growth. Let's get started right at the beginning by constructing the glass nano tank. Don't be intimidated, as it's really not too difficult to make and very budget friendly. You can make one for under $20 or even cheaper if you've already got some of the equipment. To build the tank, I like to use the glass from frameless picture frames. They're very cheap to get hold of and even cheaper if you get them secondhand. To cut the glass, you're going to need these following tools. You'll need a glass cutter, a ruler and a marker pen. I'm starting by marking down the measurements where I'm cutting the glass. A really useful tip is to attach some blue tack on the underside of the ruler, as it helps it stick to the glass and makes the cuts much straighter. After lining the ruler up with the marks that I made, I'm ready to cut after putting on some safety glasses. Now I'm taking the glass cutter and firmly pushing it into the glass and pulling it back simultaneously. If you're doing it right, it should sound similar to tearing a piece of paper in half. Now that a nice straight score has been made on the glass, it's time to break it. I'll show you a couple techniques to break the glass, starting with my favourite, which requires a wooden skewer. I'm placing the skewer under the glass right underneath the score line. I can now hold the left side down whilst applying pressure to the elevated right side. As you can see, it snapped perfectly right down the score line. This here is the cutoff, but I'm not going to throw it away, as I'm sure it will come in handy for one of the other sides. One important thing to note when cutting glass is to only score the glass once. Going over the same score line more than once will quickly blunten the glass cutter, and you can also be left with jagged edges, which isn't what you want. Another way of breaking the glass is by gently tapping the line on a straight edge. It breaks easy and it's nice and straight. Cutting glass really isn't as difficult as you might think it is, and like most things, all it takes is a bit of practice. You're bound to go wrong here and there, as do I, but that's all part of the learning process. Here's the glass all cut out. I'll list all the dimensions for every piece up on screen now. The factory edges of the glass are extremely smooth, but the sides that I cut are very sharp. Before I can move on, these sharp sides need to be sanded down. It's really important to sand the glass whilst it's wet, as this eliminates glass dust, which is something you definitely don't want to be breathing in. With all the pieces sanded, cleaned and dried, the tank is ready to be assembled. Before applying the silicone, I'm placing on some electrical tape on the glass, which will help hold the pieces together whilst it's drying. I also find it handy to place the glass down on the sides that they're going to be attached. The back panel is at the back, with the left and right at either side. To assemble the tank, I'm using clear aquarium silicone. The opening at the end is a bit big for this size tank, but a quick fix is to add some tape. As a general rule of thumb, the thickness of the bead of silicone should be no less than the thickness of the glass. I like to make it slightly wider just to be on the safe side. You might find it quite tricky at first to make these beads straight and consistent. It's nothing a bit of practice won't fix, but a good tip I can give you is, instead of pulling the silicone back with your arms, move back with your entire body instead. When assembling the tank, it's important to try and work relatively fast whilst trying not to rush. I'm making sure the panels are perfectly in line and square before anchoring them down with the tape. I'll then use my finger to smoothen out the inside edge, which will also help remove excess silicone. I'd usually add a secondary bead on the interior edge, but it's not really necessary on a small tank like this one. With the back and sides in place, I can now install the shallow front panel, followed by the top. It's the next day and the silicone has fully dried. Before I can attach the door, I need to clean the entire tank up. I'll start by removing the electrical tape, and then I can start cutting off the excess silicone. To do this, I'm using a sharp blade and going around all the edges to make it nice and tidy. This is probably the most satisfying part, but it goes without saying to be extremely careful with the sharp blade. With all the silicone cleaned up, the tank's looking really tidy and it's ready for the door. This piece of glass that I cut to size fits perfectly in the front opening. To start off, I'm placing on some electrical tape which will help keep the glass in place and stop it from moving. Next, I'm attaching a strip of masking tape to be flush with the top of the glass door. I'll place another strip of masking tape along the top of the tank, leaving a small gap. It's really important to leave this gap as that's where the silicone's going to go and it's how the hinge door's going to work. Now I'm applying a small bead of silicone along the gap between the two strips of tape. I'm using my finger to gently spread out the silicone to ensure that it's in contact with all the glass. I'm making sure not to put too much pressure down and remove too much as I still want a thin layer of silicone on the top. To give it a nice smooth finish, I'm gently pulling a ruler over the top. Whilst it's still wet, I can remove the masking tape and then leave it to dry for 24 hours. Now that the silicone is dry, I can remove the electrical tape and then the hinge door is complete. I've used this technique many times and it's always worked really well. The biggest worry people seem to have with this hinge is whether it's strong enough. As you can see, I'm giving it a good tug, and although it's got some stretch, it's certainly not going anywhere. The last step before I can start building is doing a quick water test to ensure that there's no leaks. I'm filling the tank up with water and then leaving it for a good few hours. There's no leaks, so let's get to work building the paludarium. I want this tank to have a background that the plants can use to grow on and climb up. To create this background, what I'm going to use is some coarse filter foam. It's super easy to work with and very cost effective. I'm using some scissors to roughly cut it down and then seeing how it fits inside the tank. It fits nice and snug, but as you can see it's way too thick, so what I'm going to do is cut it in half. Now that it's a lot thinner, it fits much better inside the tank and doesn't take up as much room. I've also created two side panels which will go on the left and right side of the paludarium. I'm not worried about the plain look of the background as its main purpose is to be a medium for the plants to grow on. To attach the expanding foam to the glass, I'm going to use some black aquarium silicone. The colour doesn't really matter and you can simply use the same silicone that you built the tank from. After applying a generous amount onto the foam, I'm pressing it in place inside the tank. To avoid getting the silicone on my hands, I'm using some tissue to press the foam down. I'll repeat the exact same process with both the side panels as well. 24 hours have passed and the silicone is fully cured and the background is complete. What I'm going to do now is start building the retaining wall which will separate the land area from the water area. This is slate stone and it's what I'll use to build the wall. You can use pretty much any rock or stone that you've got available. Instead of struggling to build the wall inside the tank, I'm taking one of the old picture frame back-ends and marking out the dimensions. This makes things much easier, especially when it comes to gluing the stones together. I'm happy with these stones at the base of the wall, so I'm going to use some gel type super glue to lock them together. I can now build up the wall with more stones and continue gluing them together as I go. After a little bit of work and a few hours to dry, here's the complete retaining wall. It's nice and sturdy and I really like how it looks. I can now place the retaining wall inside the paludarium and it wedges itself between the coarse filter foam really well and it doesn't even need to be glued down. In the retaining wall there are a few gaps which would cause the substrate to leak out into the foreground, which is not ideal. A quick and easy fix to this is to tear off some chunks of filter foam and plug the holes in from the back. It does look a bit messy from behind, but once you flip the wall over you can't even notice them. Now that the retaining wall is complete, it's time to add some substrate. For this paludarium, what I'm using is aqua soil, but you can get away with using something as simple as gravel. With that said, gravel contains very little nutrients, so you would have to add some liquid fertilizer to the water in order for the paludarium to thrive. As is, the hardscape's a bit boring, so let's change that. I found these small pieces of wood in my back garden and I think they'll look great inside this paludarium. After a bit of trial and error, here's the placement I've settled on. I like how it looks, but the wood is only balancing in place at the moment, so I do need to lock it down. Once again, I'm using some gel type superglue. To help the glue dry faster and stronger, I'm pouring on some fine sand. This has the added benefit of hiding the glue and making the joints look more natural. I think the fine sand will also look great at the base of the water area. To give the sand a bit more variation and detail, I'm going to pour in some fine gravel followed by some crushed slate stone. I think that looks much more natural than just plain sand. Despite the hardscape being extremely simple and very cheap to make, I really do like how it looks, and it's certainly easy to replicate for beginners. After giving the paludarium a good spray down, it's time to start bringing the tank to life with plants. I'm going to start with this Anubis, which I think will look good growing at the base of the wood. In the gap next to the Anubis, I'm going to wedge in a small piece of Bucephalandra. Next, I want to add a small leafed plant that's going to climb and cover the entire background of the paludarium. I think the perfect plant for this is going to be some Hydrocotyle. Its leaves won't get any bigger than this, and it's super easy to grow and loves to climb. I'm planting in a few patches at the base, and it'll soon start creeping and climbing up the background. I think the paludarium can do with some colour in this open patch on the right. This Alternanthera mini should do the trick. I'm purposefully using a small amount of plants just to show you that you can do it on a budget. Although it looks very empty at the moment, the plants will grow in no time at all. With most of the plants in, I can now add the water. A small piece of paper towel helps disperse the water and stops it from disrupting the scape too much. All I'm using is dechlorinated tap water. I think some duckweed will look great on the water's surface and add some really nice detail. It does multiply fast, so I will have to keep on top of it. After introducing some springtails, the paludarium is complete. It may not look the best right now, but after a month or two of growth, it's going to completely transform. A month and a half has passed and the paludarium is looking better than ever. The plants have grown in really well, with the main focus being on the Hydrocotyle, which has done a great job at climbing up the background. I haven't trimmed it yet, but I will have to, as it will completely outgrow all the other plants. Here are a few details about the care that you might find useful. I've been doing a water change every couple weeks, which is super easy to do with a big syringe like this one. As for lighting, it sits on one of my racks under an LED aquarium light. The light is set up on a timer to be on for 12 hours a day. I'll leave a link in the description, as well as a link to this display light, which would work for this paludarium really well. If you want to stay on a budget, you can certainly use natural lighting. Just make sure you avoid direct sunlight. I really hope you found this video useful and decide to have a go at making a paludarium like this one yourself. If you want to watch some more build videos, check out this one here, as I think you might enjoy it.